Snow fell the way memories sometimes do. Quiet, endless, and without asking permission. The little depot crouched at the edge of the valley, its wooden sign half buried beneath drifts. A train exhaled a final sigh of steam and rattled away into the white horizon, leaving behind only silence, footprints, and two women who looked like mirrored ghosts of one another. Ayanna Whitlock pressed her gloved hand against her sister's, as though touch alone could anchor them to this strange new place. Their faces, identical save for the faint scar above Ayanna's lip, were wind-burned from the long journey west. They had traveled across rivers, plains, and suspicion, carrying everything they owned in two small carpetbags and a folded letter promising marriage, security, and a home in the Wyoming hills. But no man waited at the station. Only snow, wind, and the pitying eyes of strangers. "Maybe he's late," Elsie whispered, voice trembling with both hope and shame. No one answered her. A station hand spat into the snow. "Ain't nobody comin' for mail-order brides this week. Your fella, what was his name again? He died near 3 weeks back. Fever took him." He lifted his cap as though that counted for comfort. "Best head back east, ladies." East no longer existed for them. They had sold their sewing machines, pawned their mother's wedding rings, and borrowed train fare from a churchwoman who believed in salvation through marriage. Ayanna thanked the man with a nod that hid her cracking composure. Beside her, Elsie tried to smile, as if dignity could be built from the ashes of disappointment. The snow thickened. The town was a scatter of dim lanterns through fog, shapes of men in coats, horses shifting, a saloon's piano leaking a mournful tune. Each sound felt far away. Ayanna's voice was barely audible. "We'll find work. Somewhere." "Doing what?" Elsie asked, looking at her hands. Fine hands once trained to embroider flowers for dowries that never came. "We don't belong here." And indeed, they didn't. The world of the West did not welcome softness. The stares of men on the platform made that clear enough. Mrs. Martha Clay emerged from the doorway of the general store, coat drawn tight around her. "Poor things," she murmured, her face caught between sympathy and caution. "2 women alone, best come with me at least till we figure what to do." Before Ayanna could answer, a gust of wind shoved through the station. Hooves clattered on the road. Heads turned. From the veil of snow, a rider approached, a tall figure, bareheaded despite the cold, his skin bronze against the whiteness. He dismounted with the silent grace of someone born to balance on moving earth. The crowd murmured. "Apache," someone hissed, not kindly. He ignored them. A long braid, dark as midnight, brushed his shoulder as he walked toward the twins. His poncho hung heavy with melted snow. Beneath it, his chest was bare to the storm, muscles marked by scars like half-forgotten wars. His eyes, black and unreadable, studied the sisters without threat, only a steady, curious stillness. "You are the Whitlock women," he said, voice low and resonant, as though he had spoken little in years. Ayanna blinked. "We are." He nodded once. "Your letter reached the mountain before you did. The man you were to wed owed me his horses. When he died, his debts became mine to honor." He extended a hand, large and steady. "You'll come with me." The crowd fell silent, scandal hanging in the air like frost. Elsie's breath hitched. "Sir, we can't." "You can," he interrupted gently, not unkind. "Storm's coming." It wasn't a request, and something in his tone, neither command nor mercy, unraveled the last thread of resistance in Ayanna. She saw no danger in his face, only a strange kind of weariness, a dignity untouched by judgment. When his hand closed around her suitcase, she let it go. Martha Clay's voice followed them through the snow. "You can't just take them, Tala Redhorse." The man turned slightly. "Then come claim them yourself." His words were calm, but they carried a weight that made no one step forward. And so the sisters followed him, 2 pale figures swallowed by a storm, leaving behind the world's small cruelties and the echo of laughter from the saloon. The trail wound through the hills. The sky darkened to slate. They walked for hours, the snow deepening around their boots, breath rising in ghostly plumes. Tala rode ahead, leading a second horse burdened with supplies. Every so often he looked back, not to speak, but to be sure they were still there. Elsie stumbled once, falling to her knees. Before Iona could help her, Tala was already there, lifting her effortlessly as though she weighed nothing. "We rest," he said simply, setting her beside a pine. He gathered kindling, struck flint, and coaxed flame from frozen air. The sisters huddled near it, trembling not from cold but from disbelief. This silent man, half myth to the townsfolk, had given them warmth without question. "Why?" Iona finally asked, her voice small against the crackle of fire. "Why help us?" He fed another branch to the flames. "Because you asked for a home," he said. "And someone should answer." His words settled between them like falling snow, quiet, unassuming, impossible to ignore. When the fire died down, he led them onward to a cabin nestled against the mountain's shoulder, smoke curling from its chimney. The windows glowed faintly, promising shelter, though the path to it felt as long as a lifetime. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and horsehide. The walls were lined with hand-carved shelves, a small table, 2 extra blankets folded neatly. A boy, no older than 8, peeked from behind the stove, his eyes wide. Tala spoke to him in a tongue the sisters didn't understand, and the child nodded, disappearing into a side room. "You will stay here," Tala said, motioning toward the empty beds. "My home is yours until the thaw." Elsie hesitated. "And after?" "After," he replied, "you decide." He hung his poncho on a peg. In the flicker of lamplight, the scars across his chest told stories the world had stopped asking him to explain. The firelight painted him in bronze and gold, a statue breathing. Iona felt her throat tighten, not from fear, but from the quiet strangeness of being safe. That night, as the wind howled against the shutters, the sisters lay awake listening to the rhythm of logs crackling, the low murmur of Tala's voice telling the boy a story about wolves who guarded lost travelers. Elsie whispered into the darkness, "Do you think he pities us?" Iona turned toward the ceiling beams. "No. I think he sees something we forgot to see in ourselves." Outside, the storm deepened, a white veil over the land. The world seemed to pause, caught between danger and grace. Hours later, when sleep finally came, Iona dreamed of the depot again. The jeers, the cold, the shame. But this time, the snow wasn't empty. A figure stood waiting at the edge of the tracks, unmoving, patient, his breath steaming in the dawn light. She woke to the scent of wood smoke and coffee. Tala was already outside, chopping wood bare-chested, the sound rhythmic, sure. The boy carried logs inside, his small face lit with purpose. The sight stirred something tender and unfamiliar in her. Elsie smiled faintly, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "He's not what they said, is he?" Iona shook her head, eyes fixed on the silhouette through the window. The strength, the solitude, the strange nobility of it all. "No. He's what they forgot men could be." The sun rose weakly, painting the snow in hues of rose and amber. Somewhere below, the town began to stir, its gossip spreading like wind across fences and fields. But here, in the quiet between mountains, the sisters felt time slow, the ache in their hearts soften. They had arrived expecting rescue, yet found something gentler, a beginning they didn't yet understand. When Tala entered again, snow dusted his shoulders like silver. He glanced at the twins, at their wary gratitude, and for the first time, a flicker of a smile touched his mouth. "You're safe here," he said again, the words steady, absolute. Iona met his gaze, and the world outside, the town's laughter, the storm's fury, the years of fear, fell away like melting frost. She didn't know yet that safety was not the end of their story, but the start of its cost. And as he stepped out once more into the pale light, she felt it deep within her. The quiet knowledge that every life-altering storm begins not with thunder, but with a whisper that says, "You can stay." The fire crackled like a heart remembering how to beat. Outside, the storm clawed at the cabin walls, but within, the world was made of amber light and slow breaths. The Whitlock sisters sat close to the hearth, their skirts still damp from snow, their hands red from scrubbing the floors until the wooden planks shone. Iona's hair clung to her neck. Elsie's laughter trembled between exhaustion and disbelief. They had survived another day, but not yet found peace in it. Tala Redhorse moved quietly through the room, his presence both grounding and impossible to ignore. He carried wood as if it weighed nothing, stacked it by the door, and glanced toward the sisters, not as a man would, but as one might watch deer step cautiously into a clearing. "Eat," he said simply, motioning to the pot simmering on the stove. Elsie poured stew into tin bowls. It smelled of sage, venison, and smoke. "We'll pay you back somehow," she murmured. Tala looked at her, eyes calm. "Do what gives peace," he answered. The phrase lingered long after he stepped outside into the snow. Samuel, the orphan boy, slipped from the shadows with a grin too big for his face. "He doesn't like folks making promises," the boy whispered. "Says promises make people forget how to act kind without reason." Elsie smiled faintly. "That sounds like him." As the wind howled, Ayanna brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Why does he keep us here? Surely the town doesn't approve." Samuel shrugged. "Town don't approve of anything that ain't their own reflection." Hours passed. The fire softened to a steady glow. Ayanna sewed a tear in her coat while Elsie hummed a tune from Tennessee, sweet, shaky, half forgotten. The sound filled the small cabin with something that almost resembled peace. When Tala returned, his shoulders glittered with frost. He paused at the door, listening to the melody before speaking. "It's been long since there was singing here." Ayanna rose quickly, uneasy under his gaze. "We can stop if it bothers you." "It doesn't." He hung his poncho, movement slow, deliberate. "It reminds me of when silence wasn't the only thing worth keeping." She didn't understand then, but something in his voice made her chest ache. Later, as the stew dwindled and the fire sank low, Mrs. Clay arrived unannounced, wrapped in wool, breath sharp with judgment. "I came to see you girls are alive," she said, stamping snow from her boots. "And to tell you what folks are saying." Ayanna tensed. "We've done nothing wrong." The widow's eyes softened with pity that burned worse than cruelty. "Nothing wrong, no. But living under an Apache's roof don't sit right with them. They say you're his now, both of you." Elsie's spoon clattered into her bowl. "That's wicked talk." Mrs. Clay sighed, her voice lowering. "It's talk that spreads fast, child. I'd think of leaving before winter's end." Before Ayanna could answer, Tala entered from the barn, snow still clinging to his hair. He met the widow's stare without anger. If their words could freeze the river, it would have stopped running long ago. Mrs. Clay flushed but said no more. She muttered something about prayer and slipped back into the storm. Silence fell heavy. The fire popped. Elsie's eyes glistened with tears she wouldn't shed. "Are we ruining your peace?" she whispered. Tala crouched to feed the flames, his face unreadable. "Peace is not a thing others can ruin. Only a thing we stop choosing." Ayanna watched him, trying to understand a man who spoke like poetry without meaning to. His quiet steadiness unsettled her, made her aware of how long she'd lived afraid of men's tempers, their promises, their demands. That night, the cabin settled into stillness. The boy slept. Elsie dreamed fitfully beside the hearth. Ayanna couldn't close her eyes. She stepped outside, drawn by the silver world beyond the door. The valley was a sea of snow under a moon thin as a blade. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into stars. Tala stood by the fence, shirtless despite the cold, breath misting in slow clouds. He was tending to a horse's wound, murmuring softly in his native tongue. Ayanna hesitated, the cold biting her through the thin dress. "You'll freeze," she said quietly. He turned, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "The cold doesn't touch what has already died." Her heart fluttered at the strange sadness of it. "What died?" He tightened the bandage around the horse's leg before answering. "Hope. Once. Long ago." Something in her wanted to step closer, but fear held her still. "And yet you helped us." He met her eyes. "Because someone once helped me when I no longer believed in mercy." The words hung between them, white breath mingling with snowlight. Then he looked toward the mountains. "Go inside, Ayanna Whitlock. The fire keeps the soul warm even when the body forgets how." She returned to the cabin with a heart beating too loudly. Lying beside her sister, She watched the shadows dance on the ceiling, until dawn began to pale the windows. In the days that followed, the rhythm of the household wove itself around them. The sisters mended clothes, tended the hearth, learned the ways of mountain life. Elsie laughed again, softer now, like someone relearning joy. Samuel followed them everywhere, eager to show his traps and carved toys. And Ayanna, she began to watch Tala more than she meant to. The way he spoke little, but listened fully. The way the light curved around him as though it, too, trusted his silence. When he worked in the snow, his strength was neither boastful nor cruel. It was simply the shape of a man who had survived the world's unkindness and chosen gentleness instead. One evening, as twilight bled into gold, Ayanna brought him coffee by the fire. Their fingers brushed. A spark leapt, small, fleeting, but enough to make her heart stumble. He didn't look up, yet his jaw tightened, as though he'd felt the same current. Elsie noticed, smiling faintly behind her cup. But she said nothing. Later, when the boy had gone to bed, Ayanna asked quietly, "Do you ever miss the noise of people?" Tala stared into the fire. Noise is not the same as company. She thought about that long after he left the room. The storm eased at last, leaving a world washed clean. But in town, whispers hardened into rumors, carried by wind and envy. The sheriff was said to be concerned that such arrangements weren't proper. As the sisters slept that night, a horseman paused at the edge of Tala's property, his lantern swaying like a restless thought. He studied the cabin through the trees, then turned his horse toward town. Inside, Ayanna stirred in her dreams, feeling the cold reach beneath the door, the faint sense that peace, once found, was never safe for long. Spring arrived quietly, as if afraid to disturb what winter had left undone. The snow melted from the eaves in slow tears, and the valley, once white and still, exhaled a breath of color. Buds pushed through the thawing earth. Streams cracked open their icy skins. For the Whitlock sisters, the passing of the storm did not bring ease, only a new kind of unrest. The town had not forgotten them. Gossip traveled faster than spring melt. In the general store, women whispered behind bolts of cloth. In the saloon, men smirked into their whiskey. Words like savages' brides and widow replacements clung to the air like smoke. Ayanna pretended not to hear. She and Elsie had come down from the hills with Samuel to trade eggs, herbs, and leather goods Tala had crafted through winter. The store's doorbell chimed, too cheerful for the eyes that followed them. Martha Clay, ever watchful, placed a sack of flour on the counter. "You'd best head home before the sun dips," she said softly, avoiding their gaze. "Some men been talking too much, and talk's a dangerous thing when it gets mixed with whiskey." Ayanna nodded, her expression calm, though her hands trembled slightly. Elsie squeezed her arm in silent support. They turned to leave, and stopped. Sheriff Doyle blocked the doorway. His coat hung open, badge glinting like a coin under lamplight. "Afternoon, ladies," he drawled. "Red Horse send you down for supplies?" Ayanna's voice stayed level. "We came on our own." He smiled thinly. "Did you now? Funny. Seems like you've made yourself right at home up there. Folks wonder what kind of home it is." The room went still. Even the stove seemed to quiet its hiss. Elsie's cheeks flushed crimson. "We owe that man our lives. You owe him respect." Doyle's grin vanished. "I owe him nothing. You do best to remember who you are and where you don't belong." He stepped aside then, not out of courtesy but dismissal. They walked past him into the open air, their dignity the only warmth they carried. By the time they reached the wagon, Samuel had loaded it with feed. He looked between them, sensing tension he couldn't name. "He said something, didn't he?" Ayanna forced a smile. "Only words. And words can't touch us if we don't let them." But that night, alone by the fire, those words did touch her. They clung to her thoughts, mingled with fear and anger and something heavier, the shame of once believing that being kind might make the world kind in return. Tala found her sitting outside, the stars sharp and cold above. He stood beside her for a moment before speaking. "You shouldn't carry their poison." She turned to him. "Then tell me how not to. Tell me how you've done it." He didn't answer immediately. His gaze followed the ridge where the moonlight brushed the peaks. "You don't silence hate," he said finally. You outlast it. She studied his profile. Strong, solemn, worn smooth by wind and time. You make it sound simple. It isn't, he said. But it's honest. Something changed in her that night. Not loudly, not suddenly, but like the first leaf daring to open after frost. The days lengthened. Life settled into rhythm. Tala built new fencing with Samuel, while the sisters mended saddles and grew herbs in the garden. Laughter returned to the cabin. Light, unguarded, the sound of belonging taking root. Elsie sang again as she worked, her voice fluttering like a sparrow in sunlight. She teased Samuel about his clumsy boots. She teased Ayanna about her new quietness around Tala. But when she caught her twin gazing at the man by the barn, she said nothing more. She simply smiled, as if some part of her heart had already surrendered to peace. One evening, the mountain sky bruised purple. Tala invited them to the meadow below the ridge. The horses run at twilight, he said. They remember freedom best then. The four of them stood watching the herd thunder across the open field, manes tossing in golden light. The earth trembled beneath their boots. It was the sound of something wild and unbroken. Elsie clapped her hands, laughing. They're beautiful. Samuel grinned. They like you. You should name one. Tala looked at Ayanna, his expression unreadable. What would you call the one that never runs with the rest? She thought a long while. Patience, she said softly. He nodded once. A wise name. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a silence that understood things words could never fix. But peace, like spring, never lasts long in towns built on fear. The next Sunday, church bells rang through the valley, their echoes carried to the mountains. The Whitlock sisters dressed modestly, hands trembling as they prepared to attend for the first time since winter. Tala watched from the porch. You don't need their blessing, he said. Ayanna met his eyes. No, but I need my own. When they entered the church, every conversation stopped. The preacher smiled too broadly. The women smiled too tightly. They sat at the back, heads bowed, listening to a sermon about virtue, obedience, and the dangers of mixing light with shadow. Ayanna's throat closed around her breath. The words were aimed at no one, and at her. When service ended, no one greeted them. Outside, the sheriff tipped his hat mockingly. See, ladies? God's house has rules too. They walked home in silence, the road long, the sky wide. The sisters didn't speak until the cabin came into view, its chimney smoke rising steady against the wind. He's wrong, Elsie whispered, voice trembling. Kindness isn't sin. No, Ayanna said. But it's what small men fear most. That night, Ayanna couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, watching the moonlight pool across the wooden floor. In the glow, she saw Tala seated near the fire, repairing a bridle. His hands were sure, his face calm, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who'd already endured the cruelty now aimed at her. She approached him quietly. If I make things harder for you, say so. He looked up, meeting her gaze. You make the days quieter, he said. That's not harder. Her breath caught, not from the words themselves, but from the gentleness behind them, the kind that unravels years of guarded silence. Outside, a coyote called across the valley. The fire sighed low. Their eyes met for a heartbeat too long, the air between them fragile and alive. She broke it first. You've given us more than we deserve. Tala shook his head. No. The world gave you less than you earned. In that moment, the shame of the depot, the whispers, the fear, all of it began to loosen its grip. Days later, when the spring fair came to town, Ayanna and Elsie joined Tala and Samuel at the edge of the festivities. Children ran with ribbons, fiddles sang, and roasted corn scented the air. Yet even among laughter, stares followed them. Some curious, some cruel. A drunk ranch hand stumbled toward them, sneering. Look at that. The savage's angels. You girls planning to make him civilized, or just comfortable? Ayanna froze. Elsie stepped forward, fury rising, but Tala's hand gently caught her wrist. His voice, quiet but unyielding, cut through the jeers. A man's tongue often speaks the measure of his fear. The ranch hand blinked, confused, then laughed and turned away. The crowd shifted uneasily but said nothing. When they returned home that night, Ayanna finally understood what Tala meant about outlasting hate. It wasn't in silence, nor defiance, but in choosing not to shrink. Later, she found him tending a wounded horse near the paddock. She knelt beside him without speaking, pressing her palm lightly over his. His hand stilled, warm against hers. The night hummed softly around them, like the world itself had drawn breath to listen. He didn't move away, but neither did he draw her closer. The firelight flickered across their faces, illuminating something fragile, something new. Ayanna smiled faintly. The town doesn't see what's here. He met her gaze, voice low. They never will. And as the moon rose over the ridge, the wind carried the scent of rain. The kind that comes before a storm that changes everything. Snow fell again, heavy and soundless, as if the sky itself had chosen to forget the warmth of spring. The valley lay under a shroud of white, and the cabin stood like a breath held too long. Inside, the fire roared with urgency, but the air between the four souls who lived there carried a different heat, one born of fear and the weight of something approaching. It began with hoofbeats at dusk. Samuel heard them first. He had been carving a small horse by the window when he froze, eyes wide. "Riders," he whispered. Tala rose without hurry, but his body stiffened. He stepped outside, shirtless beneath his coat, snow swirling around him. Ayanna followed to the door, her pulse sharp. Through the haze she saw 5 men descending the ridge, lanterns swaying like false stars. The sheriff rode at the front. Behind him came 2 ranch hands and a preacher in a black coat. Their horses steamed in the cold. Doyle's voice carried through the storm. "Tala Redhorse. We're here on town order. You've taken women not yours to take." Tala stood silent, broad as the barn behind him, hair whipping across his face. "They came to me free," he said evenly. "No one owns them. That's for the law to decide." The sheriff's tone sharpened. "You think your kind can just keep what the town don't want seen?" Ayanna stepped out before she could stop herself. "He's done nothing wrong. We were left with no home, no protection. He gave us both." "Spoken like a woman who's forgotten shame," the preacher muttered. The words struck like a lash. Elsie gasped, clutching Ayanna's arm, but her sister stood taller, voice trembling yet fierce. "You speak of shame while we stand in snow you'd have left us to die in." The ranch hands shifted uneasily. The sheriff's jaw twitched. "Enough," he said, raising a hand. "You'll come with us till this is sorted. The town won't abide." A crack split the air, a rifle from somewhere unseen. Snow burst near Tala's feet. Samuel screamed. The horses reared. Chaos erupted. Tala shoved Ayanna behind him, drawing his revolver in one swift, ghost-like motion. Another shot echoed, then another. The preacher's lantern shattered, spilling fire onto the snow. The night lit in brief, violent flashes, orange, white, gunmetal blue. Tala fired once. One of the riders fell, leg grazed, cursing. Then all was still but the wind. "Hold your fire!" The sheriff shouted, voice breaking through smoke and fury. He dismounted slowly, breathing hard. "This ain't how it had to go." "No," Tala said, voice like gravel under ice. "But you brought winter with you." They stared at each other, 2 men divided by everything that made them who they were. At last, Doyle lowered his gun. "Stay up here, Redhorse. Keep to your mountain. But don't bring them down to town again." He turned his horse, gestured to the others. The preacher muttered prayers. The men retreated into the snow until they vanished like ghosts swallowed by dusk. Only when the silence returned did Ayanna realize Tala was bleeding. A dark stain spread beneath his ribs where a bullet had grazed him. "Tala!" she cried, catching him as he swayed. He didn't speak, only pressed his hand to her shoulder as if to steady her instead. They half carried him inside, Samuel following with wide, terrified eyes. The cabin became a battlefield of whispers and light. Elsie tore cloth for bandages. Ayanna pressed against the wound, trembling. Tala's breath came rough but steady. "It missed," he murmured, trying to rise. Lie still, she said, voice breaking. For once, let someone take care of you. His dark eyes flicked to hers, soft with something unspoken. You already have. Hours passed. The storm deepened. Ayana cleaned the wound, her hands slick with melted snow and his blood. She worked until her arms ached, until the world outside disappeared. Elsie fed Samuel, sang under her breath to quiet him. The boy clutched her hand, whispering, "He'll be all right, won't he?" "He will," Elsie promised, though her tears betrayed her. Near midnight, Tala stirred. Ayana sat beside him, exhaustion hollowing her eyes. He looked at her as if seeing something new. "You should have gone with them," he said weakly. "It would have been easier." "No," she whispered. "Easier isn't safer. And you're the first man who ever meant the word safe." The firelight flickered across their faces. For the first time, he reached for her hand, not with desire, but with reverence. His fingers were cold and rough. Hers trembled as they closed around his. When dawn came, the storm began to fade. The mountains gleamed white, silent witnesses to what the night had done. Tala slept deeply, the fever easing. Ayana stepped outside into the pale light, the snow creaking under her boots. The world smelled of smoke and iron, of things lost and almost found. Down in the valley, the faint outline of riders moved away toward town. She knew this peace wouldn't last, that word of what happened would spread, that their fragile safety hung by a single thread of mercy. But she no longer felt powerless. She stood there, wind tugging her hair, until Elsie came beside her, wrapping a shawl over her shoulders. "He'll live," Elsie said softly. Ayana nodded. "So will we." They watched the horizon together, where light broke through clouds in bands of gold. For the first time since leaving the east, Ayana felt something solid beneath the uncertainty. An understanding that belonging wasn't given, but built in defiance of those who deny it. Later, as Tala woke, he found her at his bedside. His lips parted to speak, but she touched a finger to them. "Rest. You've already said enough." He smiled faintly, the first true smile she'd seen from him, and closed his eyes. That evening, when the fire burned low and the air was thick with the scent of cedar, Ayana stood at the window, staring out at the falling snow. Each flake drifted slow, soundless, as if time itself had paused. Her reflection wavered in the glass, half herself, half something new. Behind her, Tala's voice came quietly. "You're not afraid anymore." She turned. "Maybe I still am. But it doesn't own me now." He nodded, his gaze steady, carrying a warmth that reached her like the sun beneath clouds. Outside, the snow fell heavier again, blanketing the earth, erasing footprints, resetting the world. Ayana pressed her palm to the cold windowpane and whispered, as if to the storm itself, "Let them come. We know who we are now." The fire crackled, wind howled, and the story that began with fear found its next breath in defiance. And somewhere deep within that white silence, two hearts, once exiled by the world, beat in quiet promise of all that would follow.